Bill's not here yet.
Bill, you joining us?
So, if I get out of control, somebody hit me. Okay? Because it's been a long day and an ugly funeral, so.
Where were we at? Where was it at?
Let's see. Next apartment.
Good. Jake, we good to go?
Good to go.
Look at the light, right? Welcome to the Centerville City Council meeting on, what are we, February 20th. It's now in session. Let's have a roll call, see if we have a quorum. Councilwoman Fillmore, start us.
Present.
Meekum.
Meekum present.
Yance.
Ivy.
McEwen.
All five present, no problem with the quorum. Let's start with a prayer or a thought by Councilwoman Fillmore.
Our most gracious Father in heaven, we are thankful for the snow that has fallen. We're thankful for this beautiful community that we have to live. We're thankful for the sense of community that we live with here. We're thankful for the good people here. We're thankful for those willing to volunteer their time to make our community a better place. We're thankful for our employees who work tirelessly for the benefit of all of us. We're thankful especially for our first responders who put their life on the line to keep us safe and protected. And we ask a special blessing to be on them. We ask, as always, that as we meet and together tonight and do the work of the city, that thy spirit of wisdom and respect and cooperation will be with us, and that we might do thy work well. In these things we say in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Let's now join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on our agenda is the open session. Anybody that is here from the public that would like to speak, we would ask you to come up to one of the microphones on either side and trying to limit your comments to a couple minutes. So now is your chance, anybody from the public that has any item at all. Okay. Nobody's taking us up on that, so the open session will close, and let's go to the business of the meeting, item E on our agenda. We're looking at the minutes review and acceptance from the February 6, 2018 work session and council meeting minutes and the February 13, 2018 special meeting minutes. Any discussion on those minutes?
One slight thing on February 6th work session on line 45, at the very last word that says resident, I think it should be residential. And then just to note that the minutes of February 6th also includes a closed meeting minutes.
Yes, that's the February 13th.
Well, there's two closed meetings, one on the 6th and one on the 13th.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody okay with that change that Steve is talking about?
And I just had a comment on the February 13th closed meeting. I think I'd made this comment, but technically we have open meeting minutes where the motion was made and then we went into a closed meeting. So I don't know if they're just saying anyway, we need open meeting showing that we went into the closed meeting minute.
Would you work with McKinsey on that? Lisa, are you wanting this one to be tabled then for approval and brought back?
No, that's fine. If you can just approve them, you know, subject to that comment, and we'll take care of that.
So we have two changes, Steve's the residential. We have, Lisa points out that we actually went, we need to change it where we went to a closed meeting. Okay.
While in the open meeting.
Right, so these minutes for the 13th really should be open meeting minutes showing that we went into the closed meeting. Because they're not actually closed meeting minutes. It just says we went in, these are open minutes.
Yeah, you're right.
And then we'll have an affidavit for the closed.
That's right, yeah.
I do have another change. It's on page 4 of the February 6th meeting minutes, line 12. It says discretion of the administrative body. I'm hoping I said legislative body.
I think you did.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I see that, Councilman McEwen. So that would be changed to legislative body from administrative.
Right.
Any, so we have those three changes so far. Any further comments?
I move that we approve the February 6th, February 13th, 2018 work session, council, closed meeting, and special meeting minutes with the amendments as suggested.
Okay, we have a second to that.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it passes. Let's head to the summary action calendar. We have 3 items on the summary action calendar. Amendment number 2 to interlocal agreement for animal control services, appointment to Wasatch Integrated Waste Management Board, and reschedule March 20th City Council meeting to March 21st. And as our city attorney pointed out last time, we do a roll call vote on summary action calendar issues. So let's start with, is there any discussion on any of those, or are we ready for the roll call?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the items on the summary action calendar as stated.
You have a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call vote on it. Councilman McEwen?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Summary action calendar passes 5-0. Now we get into the public hearing section, item number 3. And this first public hearing is zone code amendments, catering general and catering limited definitions and table of use. And I think we have staff here. I think Cassie Younger is presenting on this.
Good evening, everyone. So a few months ago, we had an applicant-driven application for a text amendment for catering limited, and we ended up allowing that as a conditional use permit in the commercial medium zone. The Planning Commission directed staff to go back and re-examine the use of that definition in other zones and also broaden that definition into catering general to see if it would be appropriate in other zones as well. So the biggest difference between the catering limited definition and the catering general definition is without the limitations. So the limitations that we had placed on that were a limited number of catering transport vehicles, since there was some concern about like the aesthetics of the vans and the trucks that the business would use. And then also, based on your amendment, the restriction of the dissemination of odors to protect the surrounding properties, so there wouldn't be any food smells affecting the neighbors. So those 2 restrictions are removed in the catering general definition. And then based on the concerns that we heard from both the council and the commission, we thought that the catering general definition would be most appropriate just in the industrial zones as a permitted use. So we put it as a permitted use in those 3 zones and then kept it as a conditional use permit in the commercial zones and the lower intensity commercial zones, and then as a permitted zone in the CVH with the limited definition. The Planning Commission wanted to extend the permitted use of the limited definition through the industrial zones as well, and then also add it, the catering general definition as a CUP in the, yeah, thank you, Jake, as a CUP in the commercial very high zone. And the reason for that CUP in the CVH and the permitted for the limited definition would be because there was some discussion with the cup up application, if in case they wanted to start serving food on site, like as a restaurant. Restaurants are allowed in the CVH zone, so there could be an opportunity for like a business transition or them to open it up in both cases in that zone. But keeping it restricted in the lower intensity commercial zones as a CUP. So those are the reasons for that, differing on the staff recommendation versus the planning commission recommendation. So sorry if that was a little confusing since I'm using catering general and catering limited, and I don't know if that was confusing at all.
So my memory in reading the entire staff report is that staff had suggested for it to not be permitted at all in the CVH, catering general, is that correct? And so then the planning commission was the one who made the change?
We had it as not permitted for catering general, but we did keep it permitted for catering limited.
Right. I agree with the
Yeah.
argument. I think it makes more sense this way, but
Yeah.
okay.
Further questions for staff?
What's the difference again? What is the difference again between commercial very high and commercial high?
Commercial very high is like where Walmart is in the more intense zones, and high is like around Pages Lane. Yeah.
Is that our only commercial high area? Is that Pages Lane district? Where else?
If you look at the zoning map, the commercial very high up Pages Lane is a predominant portion of Pages Lane, but as you approach Main Street, it reduces to commercial high, so very high, and just before you reach Main Street, you're into commercial high.
You mean Parish?
Or, yeah, Parish.
Okay.
Sorry, Parish. The other place that commercial high exists is a portion of Frontage Road as it heads into the neighborhood area.
Frontage Road is,
South Frontage Road.
oh, okay.
South of Parish.
South of Parish. So you're where your Victory motorcycle is.
So I have a hard time understanding why you wouldn't have it a conditional use permit in the commercial high, because it still gives you a lot of control over it.
I would tend to agree with that. I would have said the same thing,
Yeah. Mainly my view of it is in the response of the catering, a lot of folks with a particular amount of trucks that could create, so you got your, think of a food truck business where you now are preparing all your food in a facility and sending out 20 trucks throughout the day. So your greasy catering, your lunchtime, that head to the industrial areas. And a lot of the early concern about catering general is how intense could it be? And so we're looking at catering general as not solely just a restaurant use. We're looking at it as an industrial use with 10, 15, 20, 30 trucks, depending on how successful that business is. So we approach catering general outside of the restaurant view simply from the fact of, is that if a restaurant in a CVH was serving, so Dave's Barbecue up in Layton, people like, they also do catering on the side, but that's accessory to the restaurant use. So we didn't feel in the commercial area that the restaurants were being handcuffed because accessory to a business is fine. We're thinking that the primary use is catering. We're thinking a large amount of trucks, and that is where you're basically look at industrial uses. So we just said general is an industrial use, limited is infiltrating on a limited basis with odors and trucks, and restaurants that are usually in the commercial area do catering on the side as an accessory use, not a primary use. And so we thought of them as distinct areas of use. Where if you say catering general, that's not going to be a restaurant, and you put it in your CVH, you're introducing unlimited number of trucks. And so you have to go back to the conditional use process that we talked about and try to come up with when is the 15th or the 16th or the 18th truck crossing the threshold. And that gets to be, again, back to the conditional use. When can you turn down a conditional use?
Are restaurants allowed in commercial high?
Yes.
And so it would be allowed if it were an accessory
Right.
to that?
So in the catering general scenario, there was a place down in Kearns called Condi's Foods that did a bunch of really large salad preparation for McDonald's and all the other restaurants. They would fit under a catering general because they're preparing a bagged salad. It doesn't matter if they did 50 or 10,000 salads a day, they would fit under that definition.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where you get to the issue of now you get into the food processing uses and trying to distinguish preparation versus processing. You know, bringing in a raw product and processing and packaging it. You can see how they do have a tendency to overlap in their systems.
I assume you had that discussion in the Planning Commission, and they
Yes.
still chose to go ahead and allow it as a conditional use in the CUP?
Yeah, I think Cassie covered it. They want Cutbot to feel more free. And this is my editorializing. Some of them like Cutbop as a restaurant on Main Street too. And so you have this tension that's occurring in these definition of uses. I'd be clear, that was my editorial comment. I don't want them to.
Well, I'm bound to wait till after the public hearing to editorialize.
Yeah. The other thing I think there was a strong disagreement was the limited. The commission said, let's put the catering limited all through the industrial zone. And we're like, well, why would somebody come in the industrial zone and say, I'm committing to only a limited?
Right.
So we felt like the limited was a useless to add to the industrial, but the commission felt like, well, you have limited this and limited that, so let's just be consistent and carry it through the entire ordinance.
So tell us exactly what's different with this changing this and what we are today. I mean, I know we have the catered limited is new.
That's all you have is catering limited in the commercial medium zone. Doesn't exist anywhere else.
As a conditional use.
As a conditional use. So it doesn't exist in your industrial, it doesn't exist in your commercial. It just simply one place, catering limited, CM zone, conditional use. And the Planning Commission said, hey, there's probably more places that this ought to be considered to flush out the use list to other zones.
Any further questions of staff? I don't believe there's an applicant on this, so we'll go to the public hearing. So it is now open for any member of the public to comment on this. No response, then we will close the public hearing. If any further questions?
No, I was going to kind of second what Corey was indicating. My concern with unlimited class catering is that it really does open up the amount of traffic, type of industrial equipment that you can utilize, and the amount of food prep that you're doing. I would prefer, if you're getting into that level of prep, that it's restricted to certain zones in town. I mentioned that food example earlier because I worked at that plant as a high school student, and it is not a low impact area. It is bump and dock from beginning of the workday at 5 a.m. till like 11 p.m. at night with the amount of food they were moving through that place. Now, would I love to have somebody like that in the industrial zone? Absolutely. I would invite them to come on up, but I wouldn't want to see that same sort of operation, say, over at the Desert Industries area or down in Walmart area.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
With Corey's explanation, I absolutely agree. So in my opinion, I would reverse the addition that the Planning Commission added in, and then as future applicants or, situations that are kind of that in-between come about, we can deal with that then.
So you're saying you'd strike the conditional use in the commercial very high?
Uh-huh, yeah.
So is that a motion, Councilman?
Yeah, I'll make that
Councilman
motion
Fillmore?
that we,
Just
Yeah, that we approve the zoning code amendment regarding the definition of catering general and catering limited and their permitted uses as set forth in zoning code 12.12.040 and zoning code 12.36.040, ordinance number 2018-06, with the proposed change that catering general is not permitted in commercial very high.
So where are all of our commercial very highs again?
Your commercial high is 2/3 of Parish Lane and roughly that down South Frontage Road.
But very high.
Commercial very
Very
high.
high.
Yeah.
Very high is what it is.
Oh, so the Desert Industries is just high, not
Just
very
high,
high.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
my mistake.
Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further debate? No further debate. Let's vote on it, starting with Councilwoman Fillmore.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Item 4 on the agenda, public hearing. This is municipal code and zoning code amendments for home occupations. And I believe staff, and specifically Corey Snyder, is going to comment.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is the fun of the state legislature last year. On their Senate bill for this item, they restricted the city's ability to charge a fee for home occupations. We have not been charging the home occupation for some time now. We still process home occupations the same. We simply have been issuing home occupations without the fee. So the discussion at staff was interesting. As we always debate what the legislature intended versus what actually ended up being in place is always a fun discussion at staff. But my inferred view of the bill was looking at is that there was a lot of variety of charges in home occupations. Centerville charged a $40 fee. I've heard a few $100s in the range in other cities where a home occupation fee was occurring. And there's a number of interested groups that petitioned and lobbied the state to intervene in that and said, look, home occupations are a small little business, a place for somebody to, go out and start their dream and entrepreneur an idea, and we want to make sure that the municipal regulations are tempered in that. What resulted in the end is that the assumption is if it is indeed a small business and something that doesn't have an impact to a neighborhood area, there should be no fee. Let folks do their business. If the city can define that it causes an extra need of services, whatever that may be, extra fire calls, extra trucks coming in, something unusual to the neighborhood character, if you could show in your study of your fees that it justifies the amount that you're charging. So this is similar to why we even charge different fees for business license. You have to match it to some type of reasonable conclusion on the impact. If you can prove that impact for the home occupation, then yes, you can charge a fee. Otherwise, the assumption is everyone's exempted from that fee. Well, interesting is if you look at our ordinance and what we allow for home occupations, the home occupation, the whole spirit and purpose is intended that, hey, these are uses that don't really affect the neighborhood. So sure, have a home occupation. We'll just check to make sure it qualifies, and here's your $40 fee. So our ordinance automatically starts out with the assumption that there's not an added impact to the neighborhood. So do we go back in when we've already said that this is not much of an impact? Do we go back in and say, hey, maybe we need to rethink this, and here's where there's an impact, and here's where there's not an impact? And we've chose that we have such a limited number. It's office, personal care, like somebody who's a hairdresser, what's the other one? Professional service, but there's a narrow list in our ordinances. And what our ordinance says is, well, if you go beyond this narrow list, you can still do a home occupation, but we're just going to kick you over to the conditional use process, because now you're probably in a neighborhood that we're going to have some materials, storing things in yards, doing something more intense than the house. And so if you don't meet this minimum requirements in this small list, you go to the Planning Commission and get a conditional use, and the Planning Commission can issue it. So an example is we have a bakery that's approved in the city, operates in a basement. That's not a permitted use. You can't just open up a bakery. But they came in and said, here's the limited fashion, here's the hours we're doing this, and the Planning Commission said, sure, under these circumstances, you can have your bakery. But your general, you know, the offices, the internet sales, I mean, I can't believe how many internet sales licenses that we sign off each year and how many don't renew the next year. So some are very successful, some are not. So we approached it and said, look, we're going to take the spirit of the state that this small list with these standards, we're great. The other stuff kicks you over to the conditional use, so we're fine not charging the $40 fee. We were first tempted to just say, you know, have at it, have fun, enjoy your life. This is one time you get a free pass, go for it. And the struggle that staff had in that thinking is there are people that open up their business, they invest in that business, they grow that business, and now it becomes beyond that small set of standards. And now what do? They've been operating 5 years out of their home. They've invested a substantial time in that business. They're growing it, and it's creating some neighborhood impacts, and we've approved it under this other kind of no fee, small potatoes, for lack of better terms, you know, permit. How do we do that? Because zoning's really set up to say, this is a single family zone. And we let you do some of these things in addition, but it has to still keep this residential character. Well, we know we can't charge a fee, and by the way, the fee's recurring. It's $40 every year. Each year renew, $40 every year, each year renew.
Has been.
And has been. Until this passed, then we stopped charging it. We're still issuing a license, we're charging, and we're not charging. So we've chosen to, you know, there's a couple of things that are important that people don't realize in the home occupation, is most people are seeking to legitimize from the city that they have a home occupation, particularly when they claim it as an income. And so a lot of people, they'll get a home occupation license, not renew it for 5 years, and then come back in later and say, oh, I'm applying for a loan. Can you backdate 5 years worth of licenses here? So, because I need to show this as an income. So we find that a lot of people desire to have a license. So we decided, no, we won't take away the license. We won't charge you a fee, but we're not going to take away the license because it provides a legitimate service to many of the people who want to use that and have something that shows, yes, this is sanctioned and legal. The other element is if it involves, part of the business licensing is involving the registration of the business. It protects the business owner to go in and register their business, because if they operate in a name that's claimed by another person, they can find themselves in a suit, and that's problematic. So this helps them go through the process to go and register with the state their business name. If it does involve some retail sales, they have to get the tax identity number. This goes in and they get that identity number. And the county uses this information to track that. The state uses this information to track it. We could always debate how well. I think at times it's not as well as we'd like it to be, but the county's probably more diligent than the state in tracking that. And so there's a benefit from the public at large that if there's any type of, like the internet sales and the other things, that there's somebody that has a record that this is supposed to be reported in their taxes. So we decided, yes, let's do the home occupation license. Let's do the normal procedures of making you register your business, get your sales tax if it involves one, set you up, you have a certificate that says you're legal, but now that's a lot of work on staff time. And $40 really wasn't, for us, we weren't really covering our costs on the $40 to begin with. So what we've introduced a process that in the zoning ordinance is crafted a permitted use section. Permitted uses are generally an administrative review by the zoning administrator, except for The other areas of the ordinances pretty much take that all away. Permitted use of a commercial? No, planning commission. Conditional use, all these other uses. The only place that the zoning administrator really became involved was home occupation review and building permit review for your house in a subdivision. But we still have this nice, meaty section that says, here's what you submit to get a permitted use approval. We just don't use it very much. So we decided, let's use that for the home occupation, because it verifies the zoning. We're still doing the licensing procedures to set up the business legally, but now we do a one-time fee for the business, so it won't be a recurring fee, but it sets up, here's your approval, these are the standards that you were approved on according to the ordinance, and here's the certificate that the zoning is approved. Now the license doesn't have a charge to it, and by the way, here's your license because you've passed all the criteria for the license. That permitted use fee, instead of being $40, I believe it's $250, or is it $200? What do we put?
The permitted use fee is $75.
Oh, it was $75. Oh, yeah, because
But
permitted
it's-
use is $250, but
$150 if it's a CUP.
okay, so we've changed the fee structure, $75 one-time zoning permit review to verify that you comply with all the parameters of the home occupation ordinance, and then we'll give you a home occupation license with no fee to it. Some people can interpret that as an end run. I'm hearing rumors out there with this legislative session. Some of the cities have done this, and that rumor mill's flying around. Is this an end run on it? I don't know how that's all going to play out. I don't feel it's an end run because really you're setting it up so that when you have piano instruction, when you have the smaller businesses, they can operate freely. They know the parameters that they stay within. And then anything excessive of that, we can kick into the conditional use process like the bakery and others, which is a different process, and make sure they're compatible with the neighborhood. And so I still think the zoning permit review is important to the protection of the neighborhood, in addition to legitimizing a business with a no-fee license. So we're recommending you change your ordinances. Eventually you would eliminate the fee if you went with this for the home occupation license, which you have to do. That's not something we get to choice in, but we kick it over to an administrative review for zoning. It's a one-time process, and you'll have two components to it: a zoning approval that lists how you operate, and a license that ensures you're a valid entity, no fee. So that's our recommendation. Lisa, did I cover it?
Yeah, just to be clear though, the this involves amendments to the municipal code as well as the zoning code. So the planning commission by law had to review the zoning code provisions. So the transmittal report from the planning commission are just talking about those, but there's a quick change to the municipal code just in Title VI, which is our business licensing. And we have already amended our fee schedule for eliminating the fee, the business license fee. We did that with the consolidated fee schedule update when we moved it on to MCO. And then you'll have the amendments later tonight that will impose the fee for the zoning permit and conditional use permit.
And because I misspoke, because the permitted use standard fee is $250 in our table of uses. That's right, Lisa said, well, 250 is quite a bit, so to repeat, it's 75 for the permitted use review, right, and 150 for the conditional use. So we're cutting the conditional use down in half from its original scheduled 300.
So clarification, so there are some home businesses that won't pay a fee even initially, is that what you're saying? Or
There'll be no businesses that pay a license fee.
But everyone pays a review.
Zoning review fee.
So they all pay the initial fee then of the zoning review, which should be the 75?
75 for permitted, 150 conditional.
Okay.
So that means with no license fee, there's no renewal each year?
There's no renewal each year, and I believe we tried to address.
Do you still renew, but you just don't have the renewal fee?
That's
I mean, you
correct.
still have to renew it.
Sorry, you still have to renew your business, but there'll be no recurring fee system in that either.
Right, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
And what's our anticipated penalty clause if you operate a business without a conditional or without a
Review.
review?
assuming you ignore all the nice nasty grams and you get to a citation, the civil citation is 150, first offense.
Further questions?
So I'm missing something.
Because I explained it to you, that's probably why.
2018-06 seems to say conditional use permit is $300.
Well, there's a standard fee for conditional use is 300, but your fee schedule would be amending that for the home occupation to 150, Lisa says.
Sorry, are you looking at the fee schedule amendments?
Yeah, I probably should be talking about it separately, but.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, under section 20.050 or conditional use permits, we already had a line item for home occupational CUPs, which was 150. So I'm just taking that out of one area of the code and putting it in another area of the fee schedule, because now we have the permitted zoning, and so it's just over there. If that makes sense. Yeah, if you're looking at page 1, I'm just striking the fee for the home occupation CUP under section 20.050 and putting it in a new 20.082.
I'm really concerned. I feel like we're trying to circle around what the state did.
End run is what I referred it to.
Yeah,
And
and
I
I really feel like that's what we're trying to do.
And I'm happy to respond to that. In my opinion, it's not. I think the state was responding to business licensing fees, which is a very different thing than our municipal zoning regulation. I think the state gives us plenty of deference on regulating use. So they're not saying we don't even have to look at home occupations, and they were making a distinction. But in this sense, we're looking at zoning regulation. Is it, I mean, there's some type of review to say, okay, you want a home occupation, where are you, where are you located, what are you going to do, would it actually require a CUP under our own ordinances? So until they change the law, I'm satisfied with the language. The language in the statute actually says that a municipality may not charge a license fee for home-based businesses. It doesn't say we can't regulate the zoning or the use.
Not only that, but I feel that it's irresponsible for us to not charge a fee for a specific person's need just to cover administrative costs.
Right. Well, and I've mentioned it to you that maybe, puts that alert signal up on the end run is, current bill going before, there has been discussion by some lobby groups bringing up the issue that, hey, we were really great at getting rid of the business license fee, but there are cities that have eliminated that, but they're still using their zoning code to regulate the zoning use of that. And that lobby group particularly dislikes that and is now trying to go after the municipal regulation through zoning. Will they be successful in their lobbying? I don't know, but.
Yeah, they can certainly do that, but I think it will require a statutory amendment to prohibit us from regulating the zoning of home occupation.
And that'll be a very different debate at the legislature, because now you're dealing with, an example was tow companies went to their legislature and said, I want to do it out of my house, exempt me from municipal land use regulation. They sponsored a bill and said, yeah, get rid of it. Auto repair and towing and everything, you can do it out of your house as much as you want. And by the time it got through committee, they realized how destructive that was to local regulation, and that bill died in committee. Whether this bill makes it out of that committee or changing that as the quote end run, I don't know. But I think Lisa's right. You have to establish some type of control, because if you don't establish it up front, you have a business, let's say a contractor says, look, I'm just doing my billing out of my office, my wife is doing it. Now all of a sudden you have 4 trucks, 6 trucks, a shed built in the back. We have them in the city, and it has all of the plumbing supplies in a 40 by 60 shed. And that would just be like, okay, it's home occupation, go for it. and bring in your 6 employees and 10 trucks and.
But
and
then it
there's-
wouldn't, because they're saying only if it doesn't affect the neighbors, and that would affect the neighbors.
Yeah, but now you're waiting for that enforcement action to put a correction in the business.
Right, but we still do have that means to put in the correction.
Yes.
Let me
But
ask,
it is more nasty after the fact.
Yes.
I'll agree with that.
let me ask a
So-
question that I might put at ease some of this, if, depending on your answer.
I have
You
answers, they
you
just don't match.
you renewed business licenses this year, but just did not charge a fee, right?
Correct.
All those who have a current business license, would they be subject to this this requirement to go through a permitted use review, or would they be considered as already having the license and therefore wouldn't have to submit to the permitted use?
Well, a creative revenue stream would be trying to do that, but from my standpoint, that was a regulation. It's approved under the old regulation. We're not going retroactive.
So it's just new business licenses that would be subjected to this, not those who have.
That was the question I was getting ready to ask. So the $75 did not exist. It was $40 a year.
Right.
And now there's $75 as a one-time.
For anything from here on out.
Yeah,
Yep.
but everybody that's already been there and keeps it,
Yeah, they've already signed a document with their license that said we'll stay within these parameters. So in essence, they, in some sense, had a minor review with a default confession saying, I promise to do these 9 things. And so we have that on record. We'll count that as a zoning approval. Everybody else from then on out would submit and go through the administrative review. So it would grandfather the older licenses as already deemed legit. But if it expired, if they abandon the use for 12 months and cease to do anything with it and it comes about and want to start up again, yeah, they could potentially be subject to the new $75.
So just for clarification, this question for you, Lisa, if it's not listed in the permitted uses, it's not permitted?
The home occupation?
Correct.
It's not permitted, but it could bump up to the CUP. So anything not listed in here, then they have to go through the conditional use permit process and could be approved that way.
So the bakery, if it were to come in with a new one, ought still be kicked into the half the fee of 300 to the 150 and go to the commission.
You know, just thinking here, we may want one of the similar clauses that we put in the chicken and rabbits ordinance that said they're not transferable by person or address. Because now I'm thinking of, did we talk about how this would ever,
Expire.
yeah, how do we keep track of what?
So I'm going to say that I've got 6 bedrooms and 5 business licenses on my MLS listing for my home? Is that what you're trying to avoid?
No, just,
I don't have 6
I
bedrooms.
mean, what we're
but,
saying
yeah.
is if we give, let's say we issue a permitted use, and then they sell the house, I just want to make sure that the home occupation is for that person, for that house. If they sell the house, you don't have an automatic permitted use, the next,
Place
home
you-
occupation.
The
But they
next
probably,
the next person has to reapply.
yeah, which would be very unlikely because they're not going to run the same business, but, I like to be careful. So,
Okay, but on these permitted uses, what do they have to do? I mean, it's permitted, so can anybody have a medical service? I mean, what, do you go out and check? Do you?
Now, currently, right now, we require the business license as part of that zoning check. So we're using a very inexpensive zoning check of $40 every year just to check up to make sure that the business is complying with the zoning ordinance on the zoning side. Now we're just separating that out and saying the business license is just a fee side with a couple of state listings and verifications, and we're introducing a process that says this is the zoning that you have to comply with. And it can range from narratives to mapping depending on what they're doing, because when you're dealing with a house, the home occupation is only supposed to be 20% of your house. So it's back to I've got 6 bedrooms and I'm using 5 of them for my business. And so depending on what we do, we ask people clarifying questions during the business license application process They sign a document that says, I will do these things, but for an example, is a contractor's office. I could interpret a contractor as a contractor sales and service because they're storing their stuff. I don't. I make every contractor come in, they sign that, they verify. This is office use only. So they can't bring all their work trucks. Doesn't mean that they can't have a personal vehicle with their sign on it, but they can't have 12 employee trucks, employees walking up to the site. They're using it just solely as an office. And they will often write up a narrative to say, yes, this is an office use only, and my wife does the billing, whoever it is, and we hitch that to the business license approval process. We've just hitched those two together. Now that we can't hitch that together, we're separating it back out and saying we're going to still do the zoning review process, and we still have to recoup our costs to do the zoning review process.
So would office general include, say, a leasing office if you were a property manager on site?
And operating that way. The places that it gets a little difficult is the state, like a realtor working for a broker. You can't call a real estate agent independent. Even though they're contracted with the broker as a contract employee, under state law, the broker's responsible for him. We cannot license individual real estate realtors. So there are some subtle state laws on some professions where they're operating out of their home, but they're considered under the broker license at that office, and so it's counted as reciprocal from that broker's office.
Any further questions? There's not an applicant on this one, so that we now have a public hearing, so this matter is open to the public. If anybody wants to comment, please come to the podiums. Okay, public hearing's closed. So we go to, and if there was any further questions, or if someone's ready to submit a motion from the council.
Could I just suggest, so that language I was talking about, if you'd like to authorize staff to look into adding additional language that would limit the permits for home occupation to make them non-transferable to any other person or property, and that the permit would expire after 12 months of continuous non-use, if you're inclined.
Would there be
Discussion?
any maybe to table this until we see what comes out of the state legislature?
I would be inclined to let this session finish out. It's not that far in the future that it completes. I could support that. I think my main concern is with whenever you have fee structures that are associated with new businesses, when somebody's trying to hang a shingle out on the, there's a certain amount of cost you're anticipating. This is a cost that maybe they're anticipating, maybe they're not. We've turned into basically the gig economy in a lot of cases where a lot of people operate a side hustle. Their primary occupation doesn't necessarily always meet all of their needs, so they're trying to supplement their income. I don't necessarily want to stifle that, but I definitely don't want the scenario of they've got a constant line of cars coming down the street parking because somebody is selling motorcycle helmets out of their garage. They're internet-based, but they're also using their garage as their retail location. I think that would be problematic for a neighborhood. So it's definitely a balance.
And I should remind you that the fee schedule amendment is later in the meeting, which you could always reduce it. Staff is just recommending the $75, but you could reduce it to $50, which would basically be a wash with their business license fee. But it does leave us a little vulnerable because we were trying to make these edits to comply with the law. We have fixed our fee schedule where we're not actually charging the fee, but.
Well, I think one of the most important responsibilities of the city is to keep these zoning uses in check. And so I think it's really necessary to have that first check-in with the city, get that education, what's acceptable, what's really going to be going on with your business. And I think it would be irresponsible of us to not have that in place. So considering that, I would move that we approve the proposed municipal and zoning code amendments regarding home occupations, set forth in Municipal Code 6.01.070, Zoning Code 12.62, Ordinance 2018-05.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'm sorry, I may not have been listening very well. Did you add the suggestion?
With the city attorney's suggested amendments. Thank you.
And then, again, to clarify, this does not set the amount. That is a decision separate from this.
Right.
So I wasn't through asking questions. Tammy.
I'll second it so we can ask more questions. How about that?
There you go. Thanks, Stephanie. Or
So there is
Councilmember
a particular entity that I would not like to see harmed by this discussion, but I have frequently wondered how they get away running a gun store in a residential neighborhood. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Probably not a particular, but this is not something that hasn't been asked numerous times throughout the years. I'm not an expert on the Federal Firearms Act and everything, but that has a lot of weight on what somebody can and can't do with the guns.
So you're saying you don't have we don't have any control over it?
Yeah. There's a lot that gets in our way, but from a zoning standpoint, there are, I believe, that I recall, 2 approaches where they are doing the internet sales only, and it is an office use, and have signed that they're doing no retail sales from home. Now, whether they comply with that is a whole different story. Because I was asked by one, and this is probably a year and a half ago, well, what if somebody came by my house and picked it up? And I said, well, you're not, as an office use, you're not to be doing that. You can do some retail sales under the CUP on occasional if you read that non-neighborhood disturbance, just like the promotional meetings, you know, once a month if you read into that. But each one of them has said retail sales, online sales only that have been approved in the city, which is an office.
Any follow-up, Bill? Or Councilman Hens?
How about a 1-ton Army truck that sits in the driveway all the time?
If that's a registered vehicle operated under the state of Utah, there's
Nothing we can do about it.
nothing we can do. But if there's an RPG unit located on top, I think we'll be calling someone.
I think my concern that I have right now is the table of uses. If I were to say, I'm going to pick another popular one. So somebody hosts websites from their house. So they're technically a micro ISP. Would they be covered as Office General, or would they be a non-permitted use?
We give them Office General.
Okay.
We are quite liberal on the
How
office.
general is general, I guess, because there's a lot of professional service type stuff that I'm aware people do.
Yeah, professional service, yeah. We create, that office is probably the broadest used category signed off by staff. And
So as long as
we
it's-
spend a lot of time saying, hey, you know this, no retail sales. Yep, we sign that. Donna puts it on the license, and it says right on the license, office use only. Because it really gets into heart, it goes back into is, well, you know, this is the traditional office setting, and that's a non-traditional office setting. And so you'll see probably a lot of our, if you went and audited our home occupations license, you're probably predominantly listed as office use only. And then they've signed the paper behind it that has all of those permitted use restrictions and said, I hereby acknowledge to abide by these.
So I have a question. I used to, years and years ago, went to somebody to do my hair in Farmington. And she ended up trying to get her license. And she had to put an outside door into her salon, and she had to have a bathroom in order to be licensed through Farmington. Do we do something like that, or do we just?
Yeah, there's 2 controls. That's personal care. That qualifies under the personal care definition. So we have approved the personal salons in the city. But then they have the health department requirements where they have to separate the unit and do the sinks and other things. and that's what they are required to do.
That's not
So
our city, that's the health department.
that's the health
isn't it?
department.
And do they have to provide proof they've passed the health department to get the license, or?
Yeah, we have to have approval from the health department's signature. You'll have these kind of things when they call them daycares or preschools, but under the definition of the state, they are just babysitting, because it's no more than 6 kids, 4 hours at a time. So that's also, you'll see the fire department, fire marshal, inspector out on those, and we get a signature from them that they've met the requirements.
Any further questions, debate on it? We have a motion and a second. We debated. Any amendments to that motion made? So I guess we're ready for a vote on it. Do we need to restate the motion, or you council people clear?
I think I'm clear.
Clear.
Okay. Let's start with Councilwoman Meekum.
Nay.
I'm going to do some explaining. While I'm inclined to go with Robin, because it seems like we're doing an end run, I think there's a need for the control, so I'm going to say aye.
Aye.
Using Bill's model of explaining, I'm going to say aye, but I'm going to look very seriously at using the fee structure as the actual control in terms of what people are paying for it, because the state's intent to me is not clear, and so aye.
Aye.
We have motion passes 4-1. Good lively debate and good thought that was put into it. Impressive. Item 5 is next on the agenda. This is zoning code amendments, chicken and rabbit permits. And I believe Cassie from staff is giving a report on that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So Centerville has allowed chicken and rabbit permits in residential low zone since 2010. It has recently come to staff's attention that the annual renewal fee for the chicken and rabbit permit is burdensome for property owners, and they want it eliminated. So we had a good discussion about this at Planning Commission. As it stands, the permit fee right now is $10, and then every year after that, you would pay $5 to renew that permit, and that allows you up to 10 chickens and rabbits combined. And there are some zoning restrictions on the size of your coop and how far away you can be from buildings, etc. So from the staff's perspective, we think that that initial permit, that $10 permit at Planning and Zoning, is of value because there's an educational moment that people come in and want to have chickens and rabbits on their property, and we explain to them, you know, you can't have roosters, your coop has to be a certain size, and we give them some information on how to care for chickens, assuming they will do their own research as well. But as for the renewal fee, it came up during the public hearing process years ago when this was first brought to the city's attention, that the Department of Agriculture would prefer a running list of those who currently have chickens in case, in the rare occurrence that an avian flu would ever break out, they could notify those chicken owners at the time. So we've done that annual permit every year. So we have a running list of those, everyone who's had chickens and everyone who currently has chickens in the city, which is about 30 active permits at the time, and there are some that have been closed out since it's one of those hobbies that, like home occupations, you kind of start and then you might not go very long. So the commission thought that there was some value also in having that annual renewal as well, because they felt more comfortable knowing who had chickens actively, and not just who's ever had chickens in their life in the city. So they felt more comfortable keeping more of a chicken survey. So we would keep the initial permit, and then staff would send out like a letter or a phone call or an email just to see, hey, do you still have chickens on your property? Yes or no. So it wouldn't necessarily have a fee associated with it and wouldn't be called a renewal permit, but we would still have that knowledge of who has chickens. So that was kind of the compromise that the commission had come to, because they wanted to keep the permit, but they also understood that there was, that fee was annoying to some people, but they also didn't want to like get rid of it completely. So that was the survey, was the compromise on that. So that was it.
You done?
Sure.
Questions?
Question. And Cassie, wasn't one of the reasons for the survey to also document whether the right would expire at some point if?
Yeah, that was another thing that was added to the proposed amendment. So right now in the code, there was no acknowledgement of when the permit would expire since we have that annual renewal. So the survey would also serve as an expiration date. If you weren't having chickens on your property for over 12 months, then the permit would automatically expire, similar to like a use or something like that. And also would not be transferable if you moved, or would not run with the property. So, so if someone else moved in, they would also need a new permit for that. Okay. So those just weren't addressed in the previous code text, so we just clarified that in this amendment.
Further questions?
So with this round, we're debating not the fee.
Yeah, so the amendment on the table is that we would get rid of the annual permit fee and just have the initial permit. Staff recommended $10, but sorry.
And no annual renewal.
Yeah.
So it's a one-time, you get a permit, and we'll kind of come and ask around to see if you still have it, but you don't have to renew.
So it's presently $10 and then $5 renewal, and they're talking about a one-time of $10 to $20 up front, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like what we're saying, I guess we're just also discussing the fee later as well.
Correct. Yeah, since essentially the staff would be doing pretty much the same job as the annual renewal permit fee, but without that fee associated with it, we thought we should probably raise the initial permit fee, since we'll be doing the same amount of work every year, pretty much, but without that fee associated with it.
So I have a question about the amount of work and the timing of that. I know it has been that staff was sending out letters at the time of individual permit expiration. And so there's been a lot of tracking of when did that permit start and when's the renewal and the reminder of the renewal and all of that. Is that still how you're planning to do it, or are you going to pick a day and say on this day we're going to call all 30 of them and say yes, no? How would you? Yeah,
I would probably reorganize the way that we do that, since yeah, I would probably change a few things about it. But yeah, I would probably just pick a month and send out letters or phone calls or whatever I can do to get a yes or no, and yeah, see how that works out.
Right.
Any further discussion? Okay, this once again, you have some, Councilman Ince?
Excuse me. Having had the displeasure of having chickens in my backyard at a point in time, and knowing what accompanies the chickens in the backyard, I would argue that if we need anything, we probably need more, because the flies that accompany the chickens are obnoxious. And they're not just obnoxious to the homeowner, they're obnoxious to the 4 homes around the homeowner's backyard. So I have a hard time seeing this as being burdensome, $10 and $5 a year. I have honeybees, and my honeybees don't attract flies, and it costs me $10 a year to the state of Utah to have my honeybees. And they take a whole lot less monitoring, and they cause a whole lot less problem, and they benefit the neighbors a whole lot more. So I would actually go the other direction on this one, and object to what you're trying to do. So that's my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Bill, I would point out, though, on the honeybees, the beekeeper, that fee, they have access to a inspector. They can have somebody come out. They actually get an added service with that fee, whereas we don't offer any. I get the idea of an initial, and I think you should always have an initial because they need to understand the regulations and everything, but what's the ongoing benefit to the individual who's having the rabbits or chickens, I guess? I see those kind of a little bit separate. I mean, I'm a beekeeper too, and I pay the fee, and I like the fact that I have access to an inspector if there's a problem. If we were saying that the fee had some sort of tangible benefit that came back to the homeowner, that they had access to some service, then it would make sense to me.
I guess I'd actually say then somebody ought to go out and look at the chicken coops and the rabbit coops and make sure that they're complying with what they said they were complying. Because I'll tell you that my experience is most of them don't.
But that's why we have a complaint-based thing, and the neighbors say, hey, it's not complying, and then they don't have them anymore. It's how we run our city on most of our complaints.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I see what George is saying. I don't agree.
Let's move to the public hearing on this. So I open the public hearing. Any comments from the public? No comments from the public, then I close the public hearing. Do we have a motion on this?
Well, I've been dying all
further
night
questions?
to use this term, and I think the tracking is very important. As the mosquito abatement representative for the city, one of the statistics we talk about, I love this term, sentinel chickens. It's good to know if you have deaths of chickens in your area that are not due to the homeowner's desire for chicken soup, because the West Nile travels through the bird population. So whereas I'm not necessarily in agreement that we need potentially to have a fee structure, I do think it's important that we maintain contact with the individuals who have them and make them aware of those type of events, because they may have an impact from a health perspective outside of the flies. So.
Comments? We have a motion?
I move that we adopt a resolution. Am I on the fee schedule or am I on the ordinance?
Number 5.
I jumped ahead. Sorry about that. It'll take a second to pull up. I move that we adopt ordinance number 2018-04, amending the chicken and rabbit permit process to eliminate the renewal fee.
Who a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Further debate?
Can I have one staff question? How many permits have we issued in the city?
We have about 30 active permits and then about 10 to 15 that have been closed out over the years.
Okay, so a pretty small number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further debate? We have a motion and a second. Let's take a vote. We'll start with Councilman Ince.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-2. Next on our agenda is number 6, fee schedule amendments. We have 2 that we're discussing here, fee schedule amendments regarding chicken and rabbit permits and proposed fee schedule amendments regarding home occupations. And I believe that our City Attorney Lisa is commenting here. Is that correct?
Yes. So this agenda item has 2 proposed fee schedule amendments, and both of these relate to ordinances that you have just passed. The first one is for the chicken and rabbits, Resolution 2018-05. As proposed, it is eliminating the annual renewal fee of $5 and just calling the permit fee, not the initial application, just the permit fee. It still says $10. I see in the staff report on the chicken and rabbit, staff's recommendation was $10 to $20. So if you want to go a little higher on the initial permit fee, but I would remind you that the fee needs to reflect the cost of administering the application. But I think even $20, we could justify staff's amount of time in reviewing that application, doing a quick zoning check, and again, we're probably still subsidizing that process. And that's at the point when we provide them the initial packet information as well. So you can slot in whatever number you want there as long as our costs justify that fee. The next one is Resolution 2018-06, and this is making amendments to our fee schedule for the home occupations. As I mentioned before, we've already made the fee schedule amendments in compliance with state law that we do not charge a business license for home occupations. We've had that in our fee schedule for 6 months or so. So this amendment is taking the home occupation conditional use permit fee out of section 20.050 and enacting a new section just for home occupation fees in section 20.020. And the recommended fees there are for the home occupation permitted use permit of $75. And they also put in an amendment, so if you want to amend your permitted use, it's $50 to amend it, and a conditional use permit, just pulling over that $150, and also adding, if you want to amend your home occupation, the $100 fee. We didn't previously have those amendment fees, so.
And were these all $40 before?
The business license fee was $40. We didn't have a zoning permit fee.
And they were $40 annually.
And
this is the one time.
And these are one-time fees. And again, staff was just trying to analyze the cost of processing these permits. So we believe you could go lower. Again, you would be subsidizing that permit process. But we think these are a fair representation of time, probably low. But conditional use permits, I do recommend that you leave that at a minimum of $150. It does require noticing staff report and a planning commission meeting.
And clarification, wasn't there more than a $40 required when it had to go through a conditional use process?
Yeah, the conditional use, so, it was
so it wasn't just $40 if it
right,
required a conditional use permit before.
That's correct.
Well, so it was $300 for the conditional use permit, but then what was the annual renewal for once you had that?
Once you have a conditional use permit, you don't have to.
You don't annually.
But you would have a $40 business license.
Business license renewal.
Is there a particular reason that we do not charge for home businesses, a business license fee?
Based upon a new state law, new legislation that came out last year. We're no longer going to charge people that are younger than 18 years that are just doing a
lemonade stand.
Lemonade stand, that's now statute, and we're not charging for a business license for home occupation.
Well, I'm all for the lemonade stands. I like those entrepreneurs.
I don't know, some of them can cover the license fee. They make some good money.
I will know, just to remind you, when we adopted our budget for the current fiscal year, we reduced the business license fee revenue by $10,000 with the assumption that we weren't collecting business license fee renewals. So.
On home occupations.
Excuse me, the home occupation, right.
Thanks for clarifying, Lisa. I do remember reading that now. The state did that. I remember starting my business out of the home and then moving to an office. And I like the fact that you could maybe charge less for people that are being entrepreneurs in their homes, but the state's obviously telling us we can't charge them anything.
But I think Centerville was being fair in that arena. We were only charging a $40 business license annually, which was in my opinion, on the low end of, business licenses. So we were trying to recognize that that's a different product than a regular business license.
Yeah, I would say that the state code really was in response to a handful of cities who were kind of abusing this as just a revenue stream. And weren't in that reasonable range, and I feel like we always have been, and I feel that these proposed amounts in this fee schedule amendment are also very reasonable.
Do we have further discussions? I guess we actually have two proposals here, so we'll get to doing a motion on each one, but we're discussing them both, it seems like, at the same time. Probably that's how I introduced it, but any further discussion?
I do have a question. If this second resolution, 2018-06, was tabled, what's the potential subsidizing we're going to do between now and the end of the legislative silly season? And if we were to operate, if this never passed, because now we've agreed that there is a home occupancy process for the zoning portion, what is the net negative effect if this never passed, if it stayed as is today?
Well, then we'd be subsidizing the issuance of home occupation permits. Maybe Corey can explain how many home occupations.
Here, just to answer questions you want. Yeah, what it involves is it takes an application to come in, make sure they've completed the application instead of using the business license, and for the process, we'd kick it over into that category. Similar to what you see in the staff report going to the Planning Commission, for every permitted use, temporary uses, not flag displays, but temporary signs, they all go through a review process where it's a template. We do try to template as much as we can, but there still has to be an analysis and a finding for each one of those. And then Cassie does that work. And so she gets to be the good cop about here's what you need to do. And then she makes a recommendation to me, just like you see us going to the Planning Commission. I review it and deem it whether it's approved or not. So you have a couple of staff people that have to work on that and generate the paperwork in the file. Then you have Donna, and Donna has all the administrative duties of, signing its number, creating the file system for it, tracking the business license, all those things that she would normally still do. And so now you're bumping it from just me and Donna process and kicking it over to the zoning process, which is a Cassie and Corey, and then Donna will still handle the business license, but there won't be a fee recouping her work on the business license.
So the only fee that could be collected today under the current fee structure would be the home occupation conditional use? Is that the only one?
Correct. That'd be the only one that would be collected. And that would be currently, without the fee schedule change, is $300.
I thought it was showing 150.
It's showing a strikeout of 150.
Yeah, it's showing 150 in the current, isn't it?
No, that was the current.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, right there. So it appears that it's 150 for home occupation CUP now. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yeah, that's what's in our.
Yeah, whatever the fee schedule says, Donna collects it. Conditional uses to me are 300, permitted uses are 250. That's how I answer the phone.
And then you say hello after that?
Well, before I say welcome, you have lots to pay. What do you want to do now?
Any further questions or discussion? If not, let's, I guess, get a motion on the first one, the chicken and rabbit permits. Am I fair to say, Lisa, we should get motions on both of these?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a motion on A?
And I don't know if Corey wanted to weigh in. I put 10, I was just leaving the fee as is. I don't know if you have a recommendation on wanting to increase that fee.
My opinion, you're subsidizing it either way. The question is $10 is a nominal fee, but you're still dedicating office and staff to it. You know, the goal in mind that I understood from Steve first hired is we try to attempt to get about 80% recovery. We're always subsidizing. So, you know, $20 sounds like a lot to an individual, but by the time you're filing and tracking and dealing with a person, communicating with an individual about their licenses, you're long subsidized in the communications.
What's an 80% capture look like?
That's where we've never really.
And I don't remember telling you that, but you might be referring to the development-related fees that we,
Yeah, that's what this is development-related fees.
where we changed our fee structure some years ago to at least move from losing 70% of creating from absorbing 70% subsidy to more like 20 or 30% subsidy.
Yeah, so there was that study you did, and so all the fee schedules and everything was trying to recoup about 80%. You know, we don't track time by an individual, but if you look at the cost per hour of 3 personnel, even if they're touching it for 10 minutes apiece, you're over $20 already.
Yeah. So considering that, I would make a motion that we adopt the fee schedule amendments regarding chicken and rabbit permits resolution number 2018-05 with a $20 first-time fee and then no renewal fee.
We have a second to that motion.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further debate?
I think it's a reasonable number considering we're not capturing any additional from the individual. And the education piece, it's subsidized, so
Yeah.
I think it's very reasonable.
Okay, any further debate? Should we vote? Starting with Councilwoman Ivy?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Do we have another motion on 6B regarding fee schedule amendments regarding home occupations?
Come on, guys, I've had more than my fair
I'd
share.
make a motion that we pass resolution 2018-06 as stated.
We have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further debate? Okay. Councilman McEwen, we'll take a vote.
This is a tough one for me because I don't want it to appear as an end run, but it's a one-time capture. I think it's reasonable in that regard. I'll vote aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. I'd make motions, but you guys won't let me, so. Okay. We are up next on the monthly financial report, and we have Marcus Arbuckle here to present and us to ask him questions.
All right, thank you. So yeah, we're going to go over the January 31st, 2018 financial statements. We're 7 months into fiscal year 18. And right here on page 1, cash positions increased about 48,000 compared to last month. It's over here on the right side. The majority of the cash, I mean, is in the general fund, the transportation fund, and the drainage fund. PTIF rate continues to increase. Any questions about this page? Go down to page 2. This is tracking the restricted
Yeah, I do have one
cash.
question. How does this sit to where we were a year ago?
You know, a year ago, it wasn't all that comparable. I mean, we weren't doing the financials, and so cash wasn't, I don't know exactly. I haven't looked at it I just have 10 months of history.
I think I could say, if you're talking about all funds, quite a bit better, quite a bit more cash at this point, because our transportation fund has been building so that we can spend a good amount this year on a number of projects. general fund is stabilized, so I'm confident we're quite a bit higher in the combined cash.
Okay.
I mean, last April, we're at 3.1 million, and so it's kind of gone up and down, but I mean, overall, we're up, and fund balance is up, even since just last June. So yeah, I mean, I can double check in the financials and give you better for 12 months ago.
No, that's fine. I was missing that I had April. Okay, so I'm fine.
Okay. So on page 2, this is tracking the restricted cash. The general fund looks great. I mean, overall, there's about 1.4 million in cash, and about 800,000 of that is restricted, so we're easily covering that restricted cash, which is great. The RDA fund is a little bit different. We've kind of let it stay like this with the reserve fund at 400,000, and then the cash is only 200,000 in there. But all the cash will come in March with the property tax for the RDA fund, so we weren't really concerned with that. The RAP tax, I mean, has as we know, they've loaned the park. Right now, it's at 161,000, where the park is paying for the community park phase 2 and 3, and the RAP tax is paying for that, and then eventually the park fund will pay that back, but that loan's at 161,000. The water fund, I mean, there's 60,000 in impact fees, but overall that's a positive cash, which we see that go up and down based on the expenditures for the water projects. The only other fund with a negative cash position at this time is the sanitation fund, and so the drainage fund has loaned 18,000 to that fund.
That's less negative than it's, each month it's improved.
Right, it's been decreasing each month. Any questions about the restricted cash before we move on? Okay, let's go down to the next page. So we're, 59% of the year is over, so we'll compare that to the budget. We look at the general fund revenue. Overall, we're at 64%. I mean, so as the months go on, we'll become closer and closer to the 59% just because all the property tax, I mean, for the most part, comes December, January timeframe. So the one really to look at, though, is the sales tax, and we're right at that 59%. So we're right on target. We're doing good. Other ones, I mean, the one that's kind of low is the natural gas, and that should start kicking in this month with the colder, because we're 2 months behind. So February would be for December. So that should start increasing. Licensing and permits, we actually had a good month in January, and that's coming up.
Interrupting, no, at the end of the day, it's been a warm winter. We're not going to catch up.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I've still had a couple $200 bills, but yeah, you're probably right. But overall, I don't think it's going to impact the budget too much. I mean, we're ahead in other areas, so overall, I think we're okay. But yeah, that is true. It has been a warm winter. But any questions about the general fund revenues? Anything we want to look into? I mean, because as you know, on the right-hand side, if we go to page 12 and 13, we can see the details of any of these accounts. Move on to the expenses then. Overall, the expenditures for the general funds at 54%, so we're slightly under the 59%. There's a few departments that are over the 59%, but the large majority are right there or well below.
And let me note, Marcus, that a number of these departments, as we'll explain further after Marcus is part of this, we are ahead of budget, meaning exceeding budget at this point in the year, because on the salaries and benefits lines where we've had the retirements and the payouts, annual cash outs, and we'll review that with you, but there'll be a distribution of contingency funds to those departments that will bring those back into balance. We'll explain that further in a few minutes.
Does that include the youth council at 181%?
No,
That seems like a
No.
really high.
explain that one, Jim.
I can explain that one. We treat that the same as we do the 4th of July. They have a separate checking account, really. So the only thing that really should show up there is the check that we write to put into their account from the general fund, which is that $7,000. So Marcus and Jolene are going to work together in the next couple of weeks to kind of clean that up. So that's the only thing that's reflected there.
So, but does that indicate that it costs us more than $7,000?
Not of general fund money, no. It's $7,000.
Well, not right now of general fund money,
No.
but if they're spending more on an annual basis than $7,000,
They
then
are.
they're working through a savings that they've built up?
They asked the youth council members, for example, to pay a good portion of their conference costs when they go to this annual conference.
Okay.
And that's part of this total expenditure
that all
that you
needs to
see
be
there.
reconciled.
They also have some, do they still have some fundraising at all? Do you know? Anyway, the conference
Yeah.
costs and some other things that the youth council themselves are paying. There's only $7,000 of general fund money for the whole year, but it's transferred all at once into their bank account.
So, yeah, I mean, that check was cut the end of January, and so I'll be working with Jolene in getting that reconciled, but yeah, it'll be 7,000 in that. Any other questions as you scan through the different departments of the general fund? Any more detail we want to look into? Okay, we'll go to the next page. Talk about the RDA fund. I mean, we talked about earlier, but the property tax money will come in March. Expenditures, the majority of that's related to admin expenses, insurance, and there's some theater reserve fund expenditures. Also, the transfers are just the budgeted transfers to the Utopia Projects Fund. The recreation didn't have a whole lot of activity. The RAP tax fund, we're right on budget, a little over at 60%. On RAP tax, the expenditures are transfers out mostly for those parks.
Excuse me, Marcus.
Yeah.
I apologize that I'm slow. Backing up to the RDA.
Okay.
Steve, is there an issue with the $100,000 from UDOT? I would have thought that would have been in by now.
The line 2 reimbursement.
That's a wrong descriptor there. When did we get the UDOT reimbursement? It wasn't 100,000 exact. It was something else. That was last fiscal year. I think we've got revenues. I think this is supposed to be the additional amount that we plugged in case the revenues come in higher than what we were assuming. Wasn't that this number? I think so. This is not really a UDOT reimbursement. We did get the UDOT reimbursement last year.
Okay.
So, and that wouldn't have been in this fund. Well,
Well, I was just going based on the
oh,
description.
wait a second. So the 100,000 we've been talking about is a transfer from RDA to another fund. This shouldn't be referring to UDOT reimbursement here.
It's mislabeled on the summary, but in the actual, on page, 33, it's a miscellaneous revenue of 100,000.
Of 100,000, yes.
Yeah.
You might recall in the budgeting, we said, okay, in case the RAP tax revenues come in, excuse me, the tax increment, the RDA tax increment, if it comes in higher than what we're wanting to realistically estimate, we want to at least have the ability to show that it was budgeted there for the potential use. But it's given its separate line so that we know that it's not to be spent unless it's realized. So the label's wrong. I'm glad you brought that to our attention.
I'll get that updated, but
Bill.
yeah, there's still 100,000 in that budget, so I'll get that updated.
Which may or may not come.
Right, right. We'll know that By the end of this month, we'll have a report from the county, which will tell us what they're going to distribute to us in March.
Okay. Then the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund, I mean, not a whole lot of activity. I mean, there's, what, 3,800 in total came in, no expenditures. I mean, really the plan on that for the expenditures is there is a budget to move 26,800 out into the general fund to recoup costs of maintaining the cemetery, but that'll be determined by the council if we want to do that.
Well, the council has already given that guideline. That's why the 26.8 is 80% of the estimated revenues. The council gave the directive that 80% would be transferred back into the general fund. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Council members?
I do.
Okay.
Okay.
But just so we won't do that probably until the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. And yeah, if we go to the next page, there's no activity this month in the debt service fund. We just, as those expenditures are incurred, we transfer money from the other funds to cover that when they happen.
That'll be RDA money.
Yeah.
Transferred in March to cover that.
In the park improvement fund, we're a little under on the impact fees. We didn't receive any in January. The expenditures total for the year is at $350,000, and that's just the phase 2 and phase 3 of the community park. And we talked about it earlier, but the RAP tax fund is funding that, and then we're tracking that loan.
Have we heard anything on 1250 West development to see if we're actually going to get to this impact number, or are they still quiet?
That corner?
Yes.
Talking about?
Mm-hmm.
No, we expect they will proceed with the project, but I question whether we'll get that $318,000 all in this next fiscal year that we were projecting. In my analysis I showed you, I was assuming in the next fiscal year we would have the impact fees from the apartments all during that year, kind of spread out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it extends beyond that in order to get that. But I do believe the project will go, if that's part of your question.
Oh, it's just a tangential way to get to that question, using this as the vehicle. Yeah, I'm just curious if
we'll come back to that number later in the meeting when I hand out my analysis for review again.
Backing up one other delayed question.
Okay, yeah.
Expenditures on debt service, the 550. Is this our last year, or have we got one more year after this?
No, our last year, we actually have about 2 or 3
2021, isn't it?
We have one less year than the Parish Gateway project area tax increment runs. If you recall, in the RDA work session, I mentioned that the debt service will end 1 year before we stop receiving tax increment from that project area.
Okay.
Okay, and in the transportation fund, we're ahead of budget on the Prop 1 money at 60%. The Class C road is 61%. I don't believe we're going to receive that grant this year, that 9.
Well, the grant is not going to flow through us at all. The $970,000 is the federal money. UDOT's going to administer it. They're going to be paying the bills. We're going to send them our 6.77% match. So I just wasn't sure of that when we adopted the budget, but this is not going to flow through our accounts.
Okay. So revenues will go down 970, but expenses will go down 970 as well.
That's correct, yes.
Right. And on the expenditure side, there's $584,000 that have been spent. The majority of that is slurry seal, overlay, and then the bike lane.
Carrying over from the prior fiscal year. Yeah.
Right. Capital Projects Fund, Utopia. I mean, this is just transfers in from the general fund and the RDA fund, and then the pledge payments. So not a whole lot there. We go down to the next page, the water fund. We're way ahead on the charges for service, but that's, majority that's the Rimini property for a water line that came in. The operating revenues a little bit ahead at 63%. Expenditures are under at 49%. Sanitation fund, I mean, that one's typically right on with budget. The revenues and expenditures are very close, and it looks to be no issues there. Drainage fund is also a little bit ahead of schedule at 65% on the revenue side, and under on the expenditure side.
But the operating revenue, though, is right on for the drainage fund, 59%.
Yeah, that's true.
That's very predictable.
And the telecom fund looks about right too, where the revenues are typically a little bit higher than the expenditures at 5%. And then the next page is the Whitaker. Majority of the revenues transfers. The expenditures are mostly related to the restoration project, parking lot, and wages. But any additional questions, or do we want to look into detail on any more?
We'll transition into this other related issue.
Yeah.
Let me lead out on that and then turn it over to Jake. As I was mentioning earlier, we have personnel expenses that are not part of, that were not figured in part of the annual operating budgets for these departments. When we adopted the budget this year, hopefully you remember we took a different approach than has been taken in the past. We tried to budget the personnel side as carefully and closely as we could, including medical insurance. We did not assume we didn't budget as if all employees had family coverage, and then have that slush in there for that surplus for covering things such as retirement payouts and annual cash outs for leave buy down to the caps, those kind of things. And for changes in medical coverage from single to family or couple to family, whatever. Decided we would create a personnel contingency. And so if you go to your budget document, that personnel contingency, Jake, I have the earlier version. Do you have the page number, or Marcus, the last page of the general fund? What page number is that?
Yeah.
For the council to go to. I want them to see.
Page 13 is the last.
No, last page of the general fund detail. What page number is that? Yeah, what number is it?
Page is 29.
Page 29.
Okay, so on that page 29, you'll see a line that says contingency dash personnel adjustments. Everybody see that?
Almost.
And we put in a budget of 60,000, which is intended to be allocated towards the various budget units or departments as needed. We actually charged some direct things there, such as some bonuses, that type of thing. That's what you see in the 2,449 that were authorized. Weren't those the several, well, those were also our safety incentive expenses, weren't they?
Yeah.
So you have a remainder of $57,550 there to be spread to help out with these other unusual personnel-related expenses. Because we're having more retirements, however, this year than we had assumed, we're going to use all of this, and then we need to use a good portion of the city council's contingency. So Jake will review a spreadsheet with you on that, but let me point out where that city council contingency is. Well, in the general fund. No, it's back in the legislative department.
Yeah,
What page number?
Special contingency.
64794 number.
Right, on page what, Jake?
page
George, you got the page
15.
number?
Page 15.
Page 15.
Okay, page 15, under the legislative budget, you'll see a line that says special contingency. And the budget amount was $68,994. That was kind of a plug number that we ended up with when we got through working on the new budget. That determined that amount. And the 4,200 that you see there in the year-to-date column actual was because we, as an oversight, we did not budget for the annual fee on Novus Agenda. That's the 4,200. So we charged that one there, leaving $64,794 of contingency for the council to allocate still. We need a good chunk of that to help us out with the additional retirements. So Jake, would you, let's hand this down.
Yeah, that's it. They've already got one.
Okay.
All right, so what I've done here on this table to figure out what we need to transfer from both contingency lines, you'll see here the year-to-date, I included the account lines that were over 59% where we had an overage. So those are the only ones that are included here. And then what I did on that next column you see there is expected future. What I did was I actually went through each of these departments, figured out the wages and the anticipated hours that are left for the rest of this year, plus the cost of benefits, and that's what you see there is that expected future. The next line is what we've actually budgeted for each of those accounting lines. Now this next one, the retirement, annual leave, and balance cash outs, I went back and figured out what the city has actually paid out to the different employees for retirement, what their cash out was, as well as for any of the overages that we had in leave balances and any of the requests that have been made for comp time, those sorts of things. That's what that line is there. So what we have here then is what the surplus or deficit is in that budgeted account line. To understand my math here, this retirement annual leave balance cash out is part of that year-to-date.
Over in the...
Over in that year-to-date column. Okay, so it's not in addition to. Down at the bottom, I have two rows that are separated out. These are anticipated. These haven't actually happened yet. All right. So to make that line, that budget line whole, this is my recommendation, not commended, my recommended from contingency. Got cut off there in Excel. To make each of those lines as whole as it needs to be for year end.
So bottom line, Jake, you're saying that...
so here at the bottom of the first section here, there's 48,100.
Do you see the number?
Do you see that total down there at the bottom? But before you get to the two separated out rows, there's a total there of 48,100. That would be for what's already occurred. Then there's this additional 46,290 for the anticipated for the two retirement, or one retirement and one that's leaving us.
And so to relate this back to the amounts that are available in the personnel contingency at the end of the general fund, that amount that was remaining of the 60,000, we have 57,551. If we just round it off, you might want to make a note of that number, 57,551. And then in the council, we have the 64,794. But you need to understand that I have been keeping notes on what we will need that council contingency for. And there's about $12,000 that I've already noted we need to reserve for some expenditures, and that would be in a budget amendment before the end of this fiscal year. More than half of that, for example, is the additional fire assessment that we are receiving because of adjustments made to the assessment formula, which I've mentioned to you in an earlier meeting. So the judgment to be made here, Jake, is how are we going to cover these out of these two sums, right?
Right, so obviously the personnel contingency, there's enough in there to cover this 48,100. The question is this remaining that we anticipate here in the next couple of weeks or month.
For two retirements.
For one retirement and one
Resignation.
resignation,
Right.
yeah. This 46,290.
So we could use all of the 57,000 towards this, but we'd like to reserve some of that for some possible things that might still happen.
Other changes.
If we took the 46,000 out of what remains in the council's contingency, you would have about 10,000 left there in the council's contingency. Or we could take something in between. Or we could take all of the personnel adjustment, as long as you understand that we'll have to tap into the city council's contingency at some point, likely before the end of the year, to handle some additional personnel things. But we'll still have to use some of the council's contingency now. Just we wouldn't necessarily have to use all to cover the whole 46,000. Is this making any sense? Okay. So we just need some direction from you. How much of the personnel contingency do you want us to use at this point? I'd suggest we leave at least a few thousand in there for some things that there's a little bit of money, that 0.5% money in some of the department heads' budgets that still needs to be reserved. So maybe we ought to save like 5,000 of that to help us get through those kind of things that the rest of this year. If we had another retirement, obviously we'd have a bigger impact and have to use council contingency.
So if we don't balance this out this year, what does that look like? I mean, we have to find the funds from somewhere.
Well, I think between these two contingencies, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's just a question of how much you would take out of one versus
balance
the other at
between.
this time. Yeah.
Well, I would lean towards taking the maximum that staff feels comfortable with out of the
Personnel
personnel
contingency.
contingency, because that's what it's there for, and then leave us more flexibility in the council contingency.
So I would suggest then we keep 5,000 in the personnel contingency.
Yeah, whatever minimum amount you feel like we need, and then I would say the rest from the
Okay.
council
Is
contingency.
everybody else okay with that?
We need to vote on that?
So what?
I would be more inclined to take it all from one place, and that way it's a little bit clearer, and then if we need to restore some out of the council contingency,
Well, we
rather
need-
than splitting it into pieces now.
Well, we have to split it
need
anyway,
more.
because
we
we
don't
don't have enough in either
one.
contingency to cover the entire need. So we have to take from both.
But would it be better to do a transfer to the
From the council
personnel, from
contingency?
council to personnel and then zero
Could
it?
do it that way.
Yeah.
I'd feel more comfortable. I think that makes more sense. Just makes it cleaner.
Now, we could do that by motion of the council without going through a budget amendment process, right?
I mean, because we're just moving
In
it
the
from
general
one,
fund.
in the general
Yeah,
fund.
I like
yeah.
that.
Let's
I
do
like
that, yeah.
I like that then. So I guess, here's what I would suggest then, that you authorize enough transfer from the council contingency into the personnel contingency
To cover the short.
to cover the shortfall and leave still 5,000 in there, in the personnel contingency. Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Yes.
So a motion to that effect then?
Bill, your suggestion, your motion?
I'd make a motion that we take the necessary shortfall out of, that we cover the shortfall in the personnel contingency out of the council contingency, plus the amount of $5,000.
Okay.
Second?
Do we have a motion and a second? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay,
Okay.
great. That's a good way to handle it, I think.
Are you done, Marcus? You have more?
Nope, I'm done.
Okay. I just want to report that I appreciate the work that Marcus is doing. Last Tuesday, after my weekly meeting with our city manager, I met with him and Jake and Marcus just to grill them on some of the things on the financials, keep their feet to the fire, and he was able to answer the questions. I think he has to get back with me on one or two things, but But I appreciate all you're doing.
Yeah,
So
thank
thanks
you.
for that report.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we are on to number 8 on our agenda. And we have our,
Mayor, with it being 9 o'clock, could we just take a short break? It's been sitting here for a couple hours. Keep it 3 minutes.
everybody okay with the break? We're gonna lose our crowd. We have a couple people to report, right? Okay, so, have a motion for break?
Yep.
Break.